On a cold Christmas Eve in 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia, was abuzz with the excitement of the holiday season. The Sauter family, comprised of George and Jennie Sauter and their 10 children, was preparing for a festive evening. Little did they know that this Christmas would end in unimaginable tragedy and mystery. And before we start the story, subscribe and ring the bell, or you might find me lurking in the shadows tonight. As the clock struck midnight, a fire broke out in the Sauter home. George and Jennie were awakened by the crackling flames and the acrid smell of smoke. Panic set in as they rushed to save their children. They managed to escape with their 2 youngest children. But 5 of their children, ages 5 to 14, were still inside. The flames consumed the house rapidly, and despite their desperate attempts to rescue their children, the fire was unforgiving. As neighbors rushed to the scene, the fire department was called, but by the time they arrived, the house was reduced to smoldering ruins. George and Jennie clung to the hope that their children had made it out. However, as the fire was extinguished and the embers cooled, the grim reality set in. No bodies were found. In the days following the fire, the Sauters were left in a state of shock. Local authorities assumed the children perished in the flames, but George was unconvinced. He believed that something far more sinister had occurred. There were no remains, no signs of their children's presence. His instinct told him that they might still be alive. As the investigation continued, George began to gather strange pieces of information. A witness claimed to have seen a group of people at the edge of the Sauter property on the night of the fire. Furthermore, a mysterious phone call came in a few days later. Someone asked for George by name and then hung up. This only deepened his suspicions. With a fire that took his children yet left no evidence of their bodies, George became increasingly convinced that the children had been kidnapped. His suspicions were fueled by his knowledge of local organized crime. He had previously refused to pay protection money to the mafia, leading him to believe that they might have taken revenge. In the following months, the Sauter family sought answers. They plastered Fayetteville with posters featuring the faces of their missing children, hoping someone would come forward with information. Their determination was unwavering, but each day, without leads, added to their despair. Then, in 1946, the family received a mysterious phone call from a woman claiming to have seen their children. She reported that they were living in a nearby town, apparently unharmed.
I can see you.
This revelation rekindled the Sauters' hope, but it also added to the uncertainty surrounding the tragedy. As time went on, George and Jennie were bombarded with odd reports. In one instance, a truck driver claimed to have seen their children being loaded into a car by two men just after the fire. Another report suggested that the children were being held by a local family who had ties to the mafia. With each new lead, the Sauters grew more determined to uncover the truth. They hired private investigators, but the results were often inconclusive. Despite the setbacks, George remained convinced that his children were alive and that someone knew where they were. In a bold move, George decided to take their search public. He erected a billboard along the highway, featuring pictures of the missing children and the words, "What happened to our children?" The billboard captured the attention of travelers, reigniting interest in the case. Local media began to cover the story, leading to more tips and sightings. George even took to the radio, pleading with the public for information. He described the children in detail, hoping that someone would recognize them. As the investigation unfolded, several theories emerged about the fate of the Sauter children. Some believed they had died in the fire, and their bodies had simply never been found. Others theorized that they had indeed been kidnapped, perhaps as part of a larger conspiracy. Some even suggested that the fire had been deliberately set to cover up the abduction. The Sauters' persistent efforts led them to connect with other families who had experienced similar tragedies. They discovered a pattern of mysterious disappearances of children across the country, further fueling their belief that their children were still alive. In 1947, the Sauters received a chilling lead that would haunt them forever. A woman approached them, claiming she had seen the children at a neighboring farm. She described them as being well cared for, which added another layer of complexity to the case. The family investigated, but the trail went cold. The final piece of the puzzle came when George discovered an intriguing photograph in a local newspaper. It showed a group of children, and one of them bore a striking resemblance to one of the missing Sauter children. George felt a surge of hope, but as the investigation into the photo began, it led to nothing concrete. The Sauter children were never found. Over the years, George and Jennie continued to search, driven by a mixture of hope and despair. George passed away in 1968, still believing his children were alive. Jennie lived on for several more years, holding on to the hope that one day the truth would be revealed. The mystery of the Sauter children remains one of America's most perplexing unsolved cases.